And personal sensitivity is offended in these cases. And that happens because of the transfer to the social dimension. So that relationship between man and woman belongs between the spouses, the intimate relationship. And when the nudity is brought to a larger audience, that brings with it tremendous responsibility from the artist and from the producer, the photographer or filmmaker. So there's a tremendous responsibility there. The truth about man must also be considered in the artistic order if we want to speak of full realism. Now, I'm in Florence because that's where the greatest concentration of the most talented representational artists, figurative artists, people who work from the body, they all go to Florence because that is where the greatest art, the greatest art teaching is and the greatest works of art, a lot of them. So you have this funnel and you have this great concentration of really, really talented artists. And these people have the ability, because they are dealing with reality, the tangible reality of the body, because they're dealing with and they're contemplating the body visually, they have the best opportunity. They're the most prepared to understand the theology of the body. But they're all talking about realism, but a lot of them, most of them, don't get the full realism because they're only dealing with reproducing the actual model before them. So they'll have a model like this, fully nude or whatever, but they would be reproducing the model exactly. They'd be getting all the anatomy and everything, which is all very good, but that's not what art is about. That's more science. Art is about a lot more. It's about the relationship between the artist and the model. And that's not necessarily sexual, but the relationship there's a relationship between a person and a person, and there's a full realism that's called for, but that can only be penetrated through a deep understanding of the theology of the body. So that's why when I discovered theology of the body 10 years ago in New York. You'll hear about that later on if you come to the talk later on, which is the art exhibition. To have a full realism, you must understand the theology of the body in its fullest. The subject of the work of art, or of the audio-visual reproduction, is a problem which is not only aesthetic but also ethical, involving an unknown reception and an unforeseen response, and is treated in the order, or threatened in the order of intention, in the sense that it may become an anonymous object of appropriation, an object of abuse. So, first of all, we're talking about the responsibility of the artist. Here, we're talking about the responsibility of the viewer, the audience. So it's a problem that's not only aesthetic, but also ethical. Very clear. Involving an unknown reception. How am I to know how my work is going to be received? If I do a sculpture of a nude, how do I know how it's going to be received? Now, there's an interesting incident. A few years ago, I did an exhibition in Clarendon Street, and I had this image. It was a drawing of a nude. It was an academic drawing of a nude. And this old lady came up and said, "That's pornography." I said, interesting. And that's quite a thing to say to somebody. Basically, you're saying, I'm a pervert. And I had to say, well, I had to do it as politely as possible, but make the point very clear. I said, well, to be honest, that drawing was done by me with purity of heart. So there is no impurity from the artist. The drawing itself is a piece of paper and a bit of charcoal and a bit of chalk, which has no moral aspect whatsoever. So if there's some bad intention perceived, it's not coming from me, and it's not coming from the piece of paper. And she gave me the dirtiest look I ever saw in my life. Could have shut her up anyway. Okay. So it has an anonymous object of appropriation. This is what happens. It becomes an anonymous object of appropriation. Nobody knows. It could be taken up in any way, like that lady. And an object of abuse. I could do it with full purity of intention, and somebody could use it as pornography. So my responsibility is limited. I can only go so far, but I have to. At the same time, you have to challenge your audience to see with purity of heart, and that's one of the things I really enjoy about my work, is that you can challenge people, you can educate people in the dignity of the body. The truth about man, about what is particularly personal and interior in him, precisely because of his body and his sex, femininity, masculinity, creates here precise limits which it is unlawful to exceed. So it's very important to realize the power of our sexuality and the limits, even in dress, how you dress. Guys, it goes for guys as well as girls. You know, what is the target? I was talking to Veronica earlier on about this. She's very interested in theology of the body and fashion. Very, very interesting area, and I would challenge anybody to tackle that area, because it's a very, very important area. What are you saying with your body? What is the central focus of what you're wearing? Is it to arouse, or is it to celebrate your dignity and your beauty in a dignified way? It's a very interesting question. These limits must be recognized and observed by the artist, who makes the human body the object, model, or subject of the work of art, or of the audio-visual reproduction. A subject uprooted from its own authentic substratum. The whole problem of pornovision and pornography is not the effect of a puritanical mentality or of a narrow moralism, just as it is not the product of a thought imbued with Manichaeanism. It is a question of an extremely important, fundamental sphere of values. So, these limits must be recognized and observed by artists. We have that obligation, and people who take photographs and make film. It's a subject uprooted from its own authentic substratum. So its authentic substratum is the spousal relationship. So you're uprooting it, and by doing that, you have to do it with tremendous care. Just thinking, it's like uprooting a plant and putting it in another place. You have to do it with tremendous care. And that's what an artist is doing. And anybody who's dealing with their sexuality, when you have to be very careful and respectful. This is not an effect of a puritanical mentality or a narrow moralism. We're not talking about petty Victorian values here. We're talking about real, live power of our sexuality and beauty. It is a question of an extremely important fundamental sphere of values. That's what we're dealing with here. This is a paraphrase. As you can see, it's totally in italics. I remember hearing it somewhere. I'm convinced it's John Paul II, but it's a fantastic phrase and make a great t-shirt. The problem with pornography is not that it shows too much of the body, but that it shows too little of the person. Fantastic.